Well, back by popular demand, Andrew Peterson is back in the house. The first time you were here, I was sitting next to Fred Smith, and there was some nervous glances back and forth as to where's the musician. And then you stroll out on stage, and you're absolutely comfortable. And I think you had us at, I just woke up. And the beauty of that moment, and it really was a pretty beautiful moment of just, man, who hasn't done this before? And the way in which you played it, which was so comfortable. What makes you so kind of easygoing with the audiences that you sing to?
Well, I learned a long time ago that I don't know how to be anything other than kind of the screw up that I am, And I don't mean that in like I'm not like beating myself up. I just have kind of made a fool out of myself when I try to be something awesome. And so early on, I don't know, I just realized that I needed to be myself. And here's the irony of it, which I love that this happened, is that first day at the gathering, I can't tell you how nervous I was. Like I was just, didn't know a soul in the room. I walked in to the ballroom and saw a bunch of people in suits, and I'm kind of like, oh, that kind of thing. And I just was like so worked up. And then it was the first night session. And I sat there waiting on Fred to introduce me. And I had gotten my wires crossed. I wasn't even playing at night. So I sat there just like tied in a knot for the whole opening session. And then Fred was like, oh yeah, sorry, you're playing in the morning. I was like, oh, okay. Well, that was a giant waste of anxiety. And so the fact that I overslept the next morning was just the worst thing that could have happened for somebody who was trying to make a good impression. And it could not have been more ordained. It just felt exactly, it was this giant lesson that I've told this story 50 times since it happened, that God just removed from me any ability to be pretentious. Like I had no choice but to be myself in that moment, because I was still shaking with adrenaline from running down the hallway. And the fact that you guys welcomed me the way that you did was overwhelming. So it was a great lesson for me. It wasn't like I went into it going, I know exactly how to handle this. It was just, I had no choice. And the Lord kind of taught me, just be who you are.
But this is the highlight of so much of your music, is taking people from places where things are unsteady, where I don't have it all figured out, brokenness. What drives that?
Well, I think part of it is that I grew up in a culture, church culture, where people didn't talk about their own brokenness much from the pulpit, And so my dad, who's a great man, a great pastor too, I just remember, having this sense that there was the pastor version of my dad, and then there was the tired, I'm at home, and kind of human version of my dad. And I've been so blessed by the people who are willing to bring that stuff to the pulpit. There's a story, I did a show one time at a church in Missouri, and I saw, it was like the most kind of unusual audience I'd ever had. There were people of all different races there. There were young people and old people and people crying on the front. It was just this, usually I kind of know what a church audience is going to look like, and this one did not look like that. And they were so like effusive, kind to me in a way that surprised me, because some of them looked like they were like former gang members and really like tough cookies. And so after the show was over, the pastor said, I bet you're wondering what's going on, aren't you? And I was like, yes, like what happened here? Like,
so he knew that there was something different.
He could tell that I was a little surprised. And he said, well, I'll tell you the quick story is that this pastor said I was sexually abused when I was a kid, went through a lot of stuff, and I never told anybody about it. And he felt the Lord telling him, bring it to the pulpit, bring your brokenness, bring that story into the open and preach out of that. And he said it wasn't long before his church became known as the church that you went to if you had addiction, or if you were an alcoholic, or if you had a history of sexual abuse or whatever. Like people, because his brokenness was the place from which he spoke, like it was like if Christ is raised up, then he will draw all men to him. Mm-hmm. Like if this brokenness is the thing that we hold out, then it draws brokenness to us,
It's not like just the church of the open door, there's the church of the open sore almost.
That's a good way to put it, yeah. And so it was a good model for me, And when you think about it, I don't know how you are, but when I think about the films and the music that have moved me the very most, it's the moments when the people were willing to be the most honest And it's counterintuitive, from a songwriting standpoint, because if you want a broad reach, they tell you, you need to be homogenous. But the opposite is true. That Frederick Buechner says, the story of one of us in some measure is the story of us all. So if I can tell the darkest parts of my story, not in a hopeless way, but if I can be willing to be vulnerable, then I think I stand a better chance at getting to somebody's heart.
Now, you come from a little background here. You come from a family of artists.
No, not at all. Yeah, well, my wife or my children are all musicals, but I was the oddball in my home. Yeah. My dad was a small town kind of country pastor, and I was the only one in my family who sang or played, or the only left-handed person. I felt very out of place for most of my childhood.
And how did you deal with that?
I don't know. I was pretty lonely a lot of the time. I probably acted out more than I should have. I don't know. I just always had this sense that everybody else knew some secret of how to be normal that I didn't know. And the good thing about it is Michael Card says your greatest strength is your greatest weakness. So one of my great weaknesses is that I felt out of place and lonely, and the Lord subverts that and turns it into. I've had people tell me many times that my gift is community building. I'm afraid of being alone, so I tend to ask friends to hang out and play music together and do this stuff. So I think that's how it plays itself out. I was so out of place when I was a kid that in Nashville and in our community, I tend to really relish being around other people who are musical or artistic. It kind of geeks me out to be able to have that in common.
Following high school, you continued to take kind of the road less traveled a bit?
A little bit. Like after high school, I joined a really awful cover band, rock band, grew my hair long, and we toured Wisconsin.
Oh, that rock!
It was like
mega rock state of
exactly.
Wisconsin. So, sorry, people from Wisconsin.
It was great.
Certainly no slight here.
Loved Wisconsin, but the band broke up, and I came home. And my friends were like, "What was it like there?" I was like, "It was amazing, Wisconsin." But I was from this little town, so I didn't. It was like seeing the world. But the band broke up, and I was totally directionless. And part of the reason I was directionless was because I grew up once again in this Southern Christian paradigm where, my mom would make these passive-aggressive statements at the dinner table, like, as I'm passing her the green beans, she would say, "Well, I just sure hope one of you kids goes into the ministry." That kind of thing, where it's like, And so, but the problem with that was that my dad, we saw how hard my dad worked, and the ministry is not an easy life. And I was also being told that all the things that I loved didn't really count in the ministry. So if you love Indiana Jones and the Goonies and Tom Petty and Skinner and comic books and novels with dragons, they're kind of like, well, that's nice, but the ministry is being a missionary or a pastor. So all those things that wake up your heart don't really matter. You know what I'm saying? Like I was being told those things were evil, at worst, or a waste of time at best. And so it wasn't until it never crossed my mind to go in the ministry, because it was a place that was bereft of everything that moved me. And so then after high school, when I encountered Rich Mullins' music first, and then Lord of the Rings and C.S. Lewis, and I began to see that, the long shadow cast by the gospel over all of this art, And so I realized there is, in fact, a place in the kingdom for the left-handed oddball kid, the kid who likes to write fantasy novels or nerds out about songwriting. You know what I'm saying? So it was a long time for me to learn that there was a place for me.
When did you feel like this gig could be permanent? I mean, I could maybe
do music.
I won't do the cover band through Wisconsin for the rest of my life. I mean, I could actually do this.
Well, I landed in Bible college by accident because they didn't have a math requirement.
Seriously, that's the sole reason.
That was my main reason in going. I was like, I don't want to do math.
I've heard less auspicious, but that's...
Yeah. And so I met my wife my freshman year, and my sophomore year we were married. Like it fit me like a glove. I loved it. It was like being at church camp for 4 years, paying somebody to make you read your Bible. And so I wrote most of the songs on my first record in Old Testament classes. I was just sitting there just enveloped by Scripture all the time. And, I was antsy, and I was still a college knucklehead, but at some point halfway through college, my wife talked me into trying to do a concert She was like, you should do this. You shouldn't just play in the background of the band. I think that you've got something to say. And she's pretty, so I believed her. So it was by the time I finished Bible college, I had released an indie record, and I had enough mentors say, I think this is a gift. I think this is a calling. And it started with, we talk about vocation this week, as this, like, not just a career, but a calling from God. And that was, I remember hearing Rich Mullins' music, and it changed the whole game for me, because he was, well, talk about brokenness. His songs, he sounded hurt when he sang. And I'd never heard that in Christian music before. And he didn't have a great voice, and neither did I, and still don't really. And so it was easy to cover his songs, in the beginning. I was like, okay, this gives me a picture of what I might be able to do.
Right.
And so I remember not long, when I was 19, I publicly committed my life to the ministry in some way. And in my mind, what I basically told God was, if you can use me to make someone else feel about the gospel the way that this music and this art has made me feel, and that's what I want to do. I want to turn that around to you. So that's been kind of the recalibrating moment for me over the last 20 years or so. Is when it gets hard, I go, oh, that's right. I asked God if I could do this.
And you created an association of sorts, a Square Peg Alliance. Describe that. How is that? Is that push this out even further to others? Or
yeah, it was funny. The Square Peg Alliance was a name that we gave to the group of friends that already hung out and did shows together in Nashville, and what it really was it led to the Rabbit Room, and it was this idea that community nourishes art, and art nourishes community. There's this symbiotic thing that happens, and we didn't have a name for it. We just looked around and saw that it was happening. That there was this mutual, not admiration society, but a mutual encouragement society, where a lot of us who are called to this kind of music, because it's not, there's the big worship stars and the people who sell millions or whatever, but then there's people who are Christians who feel called to play in clubs and that kind of thing, but play mainstream music, and that's fine. But I can't not sing explicitly about Jesus. I try to write songs that are cooler, but I just can't do it. Like, he just comes out in these songs. And so it means that it's hard to play in clubs, but it's also songwriter music, so it's not big radio stuff. So there's a lot of us, there's a lot of people who feel that same unique calling to a certain kind of songwriting. And I would have quit years ago if it wasn't for this community.
So how do you get into the community?
Well, there's nothing formal about it. It's the people you go to church with and you rub elbows with. Back in the day, we just happened to tour together a lot. And it's not really a thing. Part of it was we locked arms because we realized that we were going to bow out career-wise if we didn't have mutual support.
So this was a topic of conversation amongst the group.
It was, and we got together and we were like, we need to find a way to help each other not go belly up as songwriters, because I believe in your music and your music, and they're saying to me, I believe in your music. And so about 3 or 4 years ago, I was grieving. I was lamenting the fact that I never saw the Square Peg friends much anymore. And I was like, why don't I see my friends? Everybody's so busy. And then the light bulb went on. I went, it worked. I was like, 10 years, 15 years have gone by, and we have music careers, and we're able to keep doing this. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it's like, okay. So the community gave us the push that we needed to keep doing this long enough to where it could sustain us.
Wow. You stated that music can change your life in 4 minutes or less. What do you mean by that?
I mean, well, it happened to me. I've had that. Like, I'm no music theologian or anything, but I can't think of another art form that people are willing to pay $15 to go experience. Basically poetry and storytelling. There's movies, there's drama, but that's not very widespread, but people will sit and listen to you. Basically tell them something for 3 minutes, and they'll buy it, and they'll keep listening to the. So it's just this fascinating thing. So on the Behold the Lamb of God tour, there's a lot of songwriters on the stage. We kind of play it in the round. So I'll introduce the songwriter, and then I'll sit back. And usually I'll pick an audience member, because I'm sitting in the shadows, and I'll just watch them while Andy Gullahorn plays a song. And I go, I know the song. I go, I can't wait to see what they're going to do at the turn at the end of this song. And I've seen people right before my eyes go from kind of passively listening, fidgeting, to engaged to weeping in the space of 3 minutes. Like, what other art form does that? I don't know of one.
This is that avenue you state that it creates an avenue between two people as
yeah,
well.
in a very short span of time, it connects two people. And that's music is fun sometimes. It's not always fun, but I like music, but I don't love music. What I love is the thrill that I get when suddenly I discover that I'm not alone on this road, that you're out there with me, that we have something in common. And I think music art in general provides an avenue for people to be comforted. And it's to me, one of the chief, it's the Holy Spirit, Mm-hmm. Jesus says, I will send the great comforter to you. And I think that sometimes he ambushes us with art.
I heard you describe one of your songs one time as truth, poetry, and longing. And I think after listening to much of your work, I would say that's accurate. Why the longing part? Why would you describe it with that word?
I don't know. I know that when I feel closest, there are these moments in our lives when we the Lord's presence is more palpable. Where you get this thrill, and they're some of the most painful moments that I know. There's this delightful pain that happens, and I wasn't able to really put words to it until I read C.S. Lewis talking about Sehnsucht. Have you ever heard that word, that German word for longing or a painful longing? And that's what his books have woken up in me. Wendell Berry's books wake that up in me. When I read Jayber Crow, I laid down on my floor and wept because I ached for community, and I ached for basically it was Eden that I was aching for, and I think that art has the ability to pique that longing in people. And that longing is a prod. It pushes you closer to the kingdom. It tells you that as good as it can be here, as beautiful as it can be here, the vast distance between what we're experiencing and the consummation, the new creation, is so far that it breaks my heart sometimes.
Yeah.
So,
some of our gathering guests and family will be surprised that it's not just music that you're involved in, but you're also a bit of a cult hero with your writing. And they may not even be aware that you've got this whole series, the Wing Feather Saga. And where does this overflow of creativity come from?
Part of it is, I don't know, I just like making stuff. I think everybody does. Everybody kind of has this thrill when seeing a plan come together. And I've got a little bit of an entrepreneurial brain, and so I tend to spin a lot of plates at the same time. And I ask myself, why did I get into this? Why did I commit to these things? But I also just kind of love it too. And honestly, part of it is the artist. If you plan to do art for a career, then one of the great motivators is the mortgage payment coming. You know what I mean? If you stop making stuff, nobody's going to be paying you. You know what I mean? So a lot of it was, most of the people I know who have had long careers in music are entrepreneurs. They're people who have learned to have 5 different streams of income. And so back 10 years ago when I started writing the Wing Feather Saga, part of it was me thinking, I don't know if I want to be slogging my guitar through an airport when I'm 60. This is maybe a way for me to begin a trade that would allow me to stay home more in the future.
But this stuff is really good. I can understand if it's the mortgage payment is trying to push that, but this is very, very creative and very, very descriptive.
Thank you. It surprises me how much I love it. There are people who are fans of the books who don't know that I do music. They'll come to my concert and be, this is the first time I've ever heard your music, but we read your books last year, and so I would be just fine if I got to spend some time at home just writing for a while, because it scratches the same itch, you know. It's the connection, the thing that happens when I've talked to a little 10-year-old kid who finished the book, and it meant something to that kid, or they wept at the ending. I feel the same thing that I feel in a concert when.
Well, I paged through some of the comments, and I mean, there are parents who are basically desperate for you to write the next book. And so now I would guess there's a level of pressure now.
There's a little bit of pressure. Yeah, it's a little scary.
To keep up.
I'm excited about it, though. There's this Chesterton quote where he said, fairy tales don't teach children that dragons exist. They teach children that dragons can be beaten. Mm-hmm. And that when I read that quote, I was like, that's the kind of stories I want to write. I want to be willing to acknowledge the darkness, but when the kid closes the book at the end of the story, I want them to feel that longing, that ache for a new world, the promise that there is one coming, you know. And you know, at the end of the creed, we say the creed at our church every Sunday. We look for the resurrection and the life of the world to come. I always feel my heart go, oh, yes. And so that's what I try to end my concert with. My records are the same way. The books are the same. Like, I want to keep little signposts to the coming kingdom.
That's the longing.
Yeah, that's the thing.
That's the longing. Mm-hmm. But you also say that you've called yourself a reluctant writer. Now, I'm talking to a guy who writes music and books, but he uses the word reluctant writer. What?
I don't know if I said reluctant. I wonder if somebody said that about me. I don't know. I've been reluctant for this record more than ever before. But no, I'm not reluctant. It's just hard for me. I think that's the thing. It's not an easy. I dread making a new album because the songwriting process is just never been easy for me. It's just long uphill slog, and every time I sit down there same thing with a book. You sit down and the voices in your head are telling you that God has turned off the tap. You know, you are finished. You have nothing left to say that's worth saying. They remind you of your sin, and they remind you of your past. All this stuff. There's this giant battle happening in your mind, and so I just always am afraid that the last song I wrote was the last good one that I had. You know, and so maybe I am reluctant now that I think about it.
But I will tell you, the thing that also we notice is there's a tremendous amount of literary content. It's obviously you've been dwelling. We had David Brooks sitting in this seat last year, and I was quite amazed at just the amount of material that he is pouring over that is actually nourishing his craft in terms of writing for the New York Times and these other resources and interviews. Is that true for you?
Yeah, I'm like when young people ask for writing advice, I just tell them read constantly. Like, you just have to always be reading and read widely. That's the other thing, is try, especially like, because I wrote a series of fantasy novels, the people will be like, what fantasy novels should I read? I'm kind of like, I don't really know of any good ones other than the Lord of the Rings and the Narnia books. Like, those were just anomalies. It's not, the stories may be good, but the prose isn't. So like C.S. Lewis wasn't reading fantasy novels or only fantasy. He was reading classics. And so, yeah, the principle is to just, who is it? Alan Jacobs. Do you know who that is? He's a kind of academic writer guy, but he had a book called The Pleasures of Reading in an Age of Distraction. It's a great title. But he talked about how whim, with a capital W, should be one of the guiding forces in our reading. Ignore the list of 100 books you should read before you die. He was like, no, let your whim guide you. Like, you'll find these, read this book and it opens a door to a room full of books, and this one opens a door to another room full of books. So like, I don't know, there are, on this new album, there's a song that I'll probably play tonight that was inspired by Eric Larson's book In the Garden of Beasts about pre-World War II Germany. And just this little tiny snippet in this song, when I was thinking about that song and describing it in a blog, I was like, oh yeah, that's right. It was the Nazi Party that inspired the bridge of this song. You know what I mean? So you never know where the little nugget of inspiration is gonna jump out at you and give you the metaphor that you need to say what you need to say. So,
well, you've got some incredible C.S. Lewis, George MacDonald, T.S. Eliot. I mean, these are all, you hear them coming up in your songs, which are pretty powerful.
Thank you. Yeah, that geeks me out that you notice. A lot of it. The bad thing about that is when people come up to you and say, "Man, that line about this," and you're like, "Thank you. That was actually." It's almost always some other person's brilliant thought, you know.
And but we're all borrowing stuff from somebody.
Yeah, so steal boldly, as they say.
Yeah. Your kids, have they picked up this creative bent as well, or is this just Dad's gig?
No, they're all in. My daughter plays accordion and piano and writes songs, and my son Asher is a drummer. He's on tour with me this fall. And Aiden is an illustrator already. He gets paid as much as I do sometimes. Like he gets commissions all the time, and he's illustrated a few books already. He's only 16. It's crazy.
Are we going to see the band? Is this like the Von Trapps?
We have done a few family band shows.
Have you really?
We have, and I cry the whole time. I'm so happy. Like I just look around, look, it's my kids. My wife sings with us, and so it's rare that we can all get away and do it, but every now and then somebody will say, "We want your whole family to play."
So everybody's got enough of a song list that they can actually play together.
We've put together a show that we can do together. Yeah, it's really fun. Maybe
somewhere down the line we're going to see the
you may
Peterson family gathering.
Yeah, that would be awesome. But I think part of it is that we live in Nashville, so there's a lot of artist types around us. And the great advantage of that for the kids is, like, I grew up with this mystique about it. It's like I wanted to make movies for a while when I was a kid, but I thought, well, I'll never be able to make movies. You have to live in Hollywood to make movies. And that's not really totally true anymore. Like, you realize that there's no mystique. You just go do that thing, you know? And so my kids are growing up with a lot of people who are professional songwriters or professional painters or whatever. But the great thing about that is that they know that it's work. That there's no illusion that this is easy. Like, the kids see this work ethic playing itself out. So Aiden, my illustrator son, like, he spends hours. Like, that's the talent. Like, you get this nugget of talent, but the thing that makes your work good is that you understand that it's just you've got to wade through
It's 1,000 hours.
The whole 10,000 hours principle. Ira Glass had that thing about wading through a lot of work that you're discontent with. And so our kids have grown up in a culture like that in our home. And so it's pretty cool to see.
Well, thanks for schooling us in the way of pain, in the way of joy, in the walk of Jesus. You've really done that for us. And I know I speak for many at the gathering. Thank you for ministering to us.
Thank you. You've ministered to me too. I love being here. Thanks.